50 million books sold, 20,000 people every Sunday, 400,000 pastors trained across 160 countries. Rick Warren built Saddleback Church from 7 people in his living room to one of the 10 largest congregations in America. On June 14, 2023, in New Orleans, it took the Southern Baptist Convention 90 minutes to undo 42 years. The vote: 9,437 to expel, 1,212 to restore. 88% of delegates voted against the man who'd given the invocation at a presidential inauguration. 42 years, 90 minutes. Rick Warren didn't set out to build a megachurch. He set out to plant one church where none existed. In January 1980, Warren arrived in Orange County, California, with his wife Kay and their 4-month-old daughter. They had no building, no members, no salary. What they had was a dream. Start a church for people who didn't go to church. Warren spent his first 12 weeks going door to door, surveying residents about why they didn't attend. The answers shaped everything that followed. Too boring, too irrelevant, too focused on money. On Easter Sunday, 1980, Saddleback held its first public service at Laguna Hills High School Theater. 200 people showed up. Warren preached in a Hawaiian shirt. That detail matters. The Hawaiian shirt became a symbol, casual, accessible, deliberately different from what people expected church to look like. Warren wasn't trying to impress theologians. He was trying to reach the unchurched. It worked. By 1995, Saddleback had grown to 10,000 members. Warren published The Purpose-Driven Church, a blueprint for congregation growth that would influence pastors worldwide. But the real explosion came in 2002. The Purpose-Driven Life hit bookstores that fall. Within months, it became a phenomenon. Small groups in churches across America worked through its 40 chapters together. Oprah featured it. Business leaders quoted it. It eventually sold more than 50 million copies, making it one of the best-selling nonfiction books in history. Warren was suddenly everywhere. Time magazine called him America's most influential evangelical. In January 2009, he stood on the steps of the Capitol and delivered the invocation at Barack Obama's inauguration, the first evangelical pastor to pray at a Democratic president's swearing-in since Billy Graham. At its peak, East Saddleback drew more than 20,000 worshipers across multiple weekend services. The church operated satellite campuses, international partnerships, and a pastor training network that touched 160 countries. 400,000 church leaders went through purpose-driven training programs. 42 years of building, an empire of influence, and then everything changed. On April 5, 2013, Rick and Kay Warren's 27-year-old son Matthew died by suicide. Matthew had struggled with mental illness since childhood, depression that never fully lifted, treatment after treatment that never quite worked. His parents had walked through decades of hospitals, medications, therapy, prayer. Nothing was enough. The news devastated Saddleback's congregation. It devastated the wider evangelical world. Rick Warren, the man who wrote the book on purpose, had lost his son to despair. Warren didn't preach for 4 months. When he returned to the pulpit, he was different. The Hawaiian shirt remained, but something behind his eyes had shifted. He began speaking openly about mental health, about the church's failure to address it, about the stigma that kept suffering people silent. He and Kay launched initiatives to change that. They turned their grief into advocacy. The man who'd built a church for the unchurched now built programs for the mentally ill. More than 10,000 condolence letters arrived at Saddleback after Matthew's death. Warren read them all. September 2022. After 42 years, Rick Warren announced his retirement. The transition had been planned for years. Warren had chosen his successor, Andy Wood, a young pastor from Echo Church in San Jose. Andy and his wife, Stacy, would lead Saddleback together. Andy as lead pastor, Stacy as a teaching pastor. That phrase, teaching pastor, would matter. On Mother's Day weekend 2021, Saddleback had ordained 3 women as pastors. It was a deliberate choice, a theological statement. Warren believed women could serve in pastoral roles. The congregation celebrated. The Southern Baptist Convention did not. The SBC's doctrinal statement, the Baptist faith and message, is clear. The office of pastor is limited to men as qualified by Scripture. For decades, the convention had debated what exactly that meant. Could women serve as associate pastors? Could they teach mixed-gender classes? Could they preach on Sunday mornings if a man held the senior title? Saddleback answered those questions by ordaining women. Period. On February 21, 2023, the SBC Executive Committee voted to find Saddleback Church not in friendly cooperation with the convention. Denominational language for expulsion. Warren, now retired but still the church's most visible face, launched an appeal. He recorded 3 videos. He published an open letter. He created a website with a 4-page theological guide defending women in ministry. He cited Scripture. He cited history. He cited the 1,928 other SBC churches that, according to his research, already had women serving in pastoral roles. The appeal went to the full convention, meeting in New Orleans in June 2023. The debate lasted 90 minutes. Delegates lined up at microphones. Some defended Warren's legacy. Some quoted Scripture against women pastors. D. Albert Mohler, president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, spoke for the expulsion. This was, he said, an issue of fundamental biblical authority. Warren, no longer a voting delegate, could only watch. The result: 9,437 votes to uphold expulsion. 1,212 votes to restore fellowship. 88% of delegates rejected the man who had trained 400,000 of their pastors. 42 years of service, 50 million books, hundreds of thousands of baptisms, the invocation at a presidential inauguration. Gone in 90 minutes. Warren's response came immediately. Truth eventually triumphs over tradition, he wrote. He quoted Scripture. He expressed no bitterness toward individual delegates. He simply said he believed they were wrong. But the institutional reality was final. Saddleback Church, one of the largest, most influential congregations in the SBC's history, was no longer Southern Baptist. Some observers called it theological consistency. The SBC had rules. Saddleback broke them. Others called it institutional ingratitude. Warren had done more to grow evangelical Christianity than nearly anyone alive. This was his reward. Kay Warren, who had walked through Matthew's death beside her husband, posted on social media about the vote. Her words carried the weight of someone who had lost too much to care about institutional politics anymore. The broader context matters. The SBC itself had been shrinking for years. Membership dropped from 16 million in 2006 to under 13 million by 2023. Attendance fell faster. The convention was aging, contracting, losing the young families Warren had spent 42 years trying to reach. Gallup reported church membership in America had dropped below 50% for the first time in their 80-year polling history. Weekly attendance fell from over 40% to around 30%. Mars Hill collapsed under Mark Driscoll's leadership failures. Hillsong fractured after scandals. Willow Creek never recovered from Bill Hybels' disgrace. The megachurch model, personality-driven, spectacle-dependent, was showing cracks everywhere. Warren had built Saddleback to last. He'd planned succession carefully. He'd diversified leadership. He'd trained hundreds of thousands of pastors specifically so the movement wouldn't depend on any one person. But when the denomination that had supported him for 4 decades decided his theological convictions disqualified him, none of that mattered. Today, Saddleback continues under Andy and Stacy Wood's leadership. The church is no longer Southern Baptist, but remains evangelical, still running purpose-driven programs, still operating globally. Warren, now in his 70s, continues speaking and writing. He still wears Hawaiian shirts. He still talks about purpose. He still advocates for mental health ministry. He still believes women should serve as pastors. Kay Warren still posts about grief, about Matthew, about the long road through loss that never really ends. Here's what the story actually reveals. It reveals that institutions have limits. 42 years of service, 50 million books, 400,000 trained pastors. None of it created immunity from institutional standards. When Warren crossed a doctrinal line, the denomination enforced its rules. It reveals that influence doesn't equal authority. Warren shaped American evangelicalism more than almost anyone, but he didn't control it. When the convention voted, his influence counted for nothing, and it reveals something about grief. Warren buried his son. He watched his life's work rejected by the community he'd served. He kept going. 42 years, 90 minutes. A man who started with 7 people in his living room, who wrote the book millions used to find meaning, who prayed at a presidential inauguration, who buried his own child and kept preaching anyway. That man stood in New Orleans and watched 9,437 delegates vote him out. Was any of it worth it? The 50 million books still exist. The 400,000 trained pastors still serve. The mental health initiatives Warren launched after Matthew's death still help families who suffer in silence. The institution moved on. The impact remains. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe the measure of a life's work isn't whether the institution affirms you in the end. Maybe it's whether anything you built outlasts the vote. 42 years, 90 minutes. The Hawaiian shirt stays. The work continues. The question lingers.